Adrian Newey has just talked about Red Bull's RB20 progress and what to expect for the new regulations. According to him, it's not looking good for F1. And at the same time, he talked about how Red Bull is a sitting duck right now, as they seem to be done upgrading their current concept, leaving them vulnerable to Ferrari's or perhaps even McLaren's comeback. The cars of 2026 will differ drastically from their current shape, with the new power units focusing largely on energy regeneration as Ford prepares to collaborate with Red Bull, and Audi prepares to join the grid as F1 moves towards a more sustainable path. Newey said that the 2026 engine regulations as they stand are currently a strange formula, given the possible demand to drive at high RPM around slow corners to create energy, but it is something the sport will have to get used to over time. However, he wishes to see cars become smaller and lighter than they are now, calling it a shame that the cars have become larger and heavier over time. "It's where all the conundrums come in," Newey said. "I think most people would say from a spectacle point of view, you probably want a high-revving V10, normally aspirated. We all kind of pine after the V10S and even the V8S of the 2000s. But of course, they are not fuel efficient. So then you have to have the balance of spectacle versus social responsibility, even though the fuel consumption of the cars in terms of the pollution that is caused by the sport is, in reality, tiny. The biggest contributor by far has to be people attending the races, and in that sense, it's no different to football or any other international sport. But it's the image and the popularization. So I think that's your first conundrum, the power source. Do you go for efficiency, which is typically relatively quiet, because noise is actually inefficiency? And then on the chassis side, to me it's small and light. The cars have got very big. Those are the fundamentals. You can then start to debate how quick the car should be in terms of lap time in high-speed performance. But the thing you have to remember is television invariably has the appearance of slowing cars down. Watching a moderate performance car is not very exciting. Cars need to be properly quick to even begin to come across as looking quick on TV. Amidst recent debate within F1 circles about the problem of filthy air returning, despite all of the efforts taken with the 2022 rules, Newey returns to his initial point of view. The car's size is crucial. On the aero side of it, the racing certainly in 2022 especially, the cars were following very closely, and even now they still follow closely. But the cars have perhaps got really big. They are fast and they are heavy, and I think that's a bit of a shame. Because one thing you can say over the years is that whatever F1 cars represent tends to be popularized in the showroom. The paddle shift gear change obviously came in F1, and that's become very popular in road cars now. When turbocharged cars were first introduced to F1 back in the 80s, you then tended to see more turbocharged road cars. Look at carbon fiber wings. Most sports cars you see on the motorway now, they have some sort of wing that pops up and down. So, it does popularize things. Certainly there's a lot of talk at the moment, quite rightly, about ecology and how to reduce the effects on the planet of automotive. What tends to go with that is mainly an obsession with reducing emissions perhaps through battery or hydrogen, not using fossil fuel. But the much bigger thing to me is actually the amount of energy the car uses. Because that's the key thing. If it's using huge amounts of energy, it doesn't matter where the source is coming from. That energy has to come from somewhere. Even if it's coming from a wind turbine, that's by no means zero carbon emissions. So, the chance for F1 to go the opposite route and go to much smaller, lighter, more aerodynamically efficient cars, I think that is the one that I would certainly advocate. Maybe that would then start to turn the tide away from these 3-ton monsters that are wrecking our roads and collapsing potholes. A successful F1 team, however, is significantly more than simply getting its cars correct. Newey believes that the influence of tyres is as crucial. However much teams and drivers complain about F1 being in a tyre degradation age where they cannot push to the limit every lap, Newey believes the balance is now quite excellent. "I think tyre degradation tends to get a bit of a bad name," he said. "But personally, I think it's actually a good thing. It gives rise to different strategies, including if you're behind throwing the balls up in the air and having a go, like we did at the Texas Austin race last year. If at that Texas race the tyre degradation wasn't significant, we would have had no chance of helping Max Verstappen win that race, and that's probably one of the more exciting races of the year as it turned out. So I think tyre DG is actually about right as we have it. It means without repeating itself, we can have different strategies, and that different cars perform differently at different moments through the race. It kind of gives a bit of variety, and in variety, unpredictability that might otherwise be lacking. Typically, the races where the tyre DG is less of a problem and the grid ends up one-stopping, they tend to be the slightly more boring races. Newey also talked about the importance of his drivers when it comes to car design. And you might think it is logical to assume that for an F1 engineer, building a car that does not require driver feedback is the ultimate goal. However, Newey does not see things that way. I prefer it as it is with the need for driver input because it gives it an extra dimension, which is part of the fascination, he said about how important the driver's perspective is, before being asked if that process complicates things for a designer. I don't know if it's more complicated, it's just more dimensions. But I think the thing I've always enjoyed is trying to extract the most performance from the vehicle. And then I say that's particularly how we integrate the feedback from the driver into the 3 different disciplines: sensitivity to tyres, aerodynamics, and engine drivability. Verstappen is reported to prefer driving an F1 car in a certain style, on the edge, in a way that is frequently difficult to manage, something that has been attributed to his comfortable lead over recent teammates. However, according to Newey, what various drivers are looking for is almost always the same, which may surprise some, especially considering Red Bull's convictions about building its cars in Verstappen's direction. In my experience, the feedback might be subtly different between the 2 drivers within the team, but what they want is almost always the same, he said. When it comes to regulations, with the approaching rule rewrite for 2026, Newey says he likes the changes as long as the new rulebook allows for a reasonable amount of freedom. This was something he thought would not be the case when he first saw the blueprints for Formula One's current ground effect generation, and he was quite depressed by what he read. From a design point of view, I enjoy regulation changes, providing those regulation changes give a reasonable amount of freedom. I must admit, when I first saw these current regulations that I was quite depressed by them. They looked extremely prescriptive, he revealed. Despite these initial reservations, the man behind Red Bull's current dominance in Formula One recognized potential for innovation. Luckily, there was a bit of a relaxation towards the end. But actually, once we got into the detail, combined with that relaxation, there's been a reasonable amount of freedom within them. As you saw particularly early in 2022, there were lots of different solutions, Newey added. They're starting to converge now, but we're now into that sort of, okay, we've done some visual changes for this year's car, but the principles are the same. So the differences are reducing internally, he said, admitting that Red Bull are starting to see diminishing returns from the current rules set. In our case, we're struggling to find the gains, if you like, in terms of aero gains in % per month or whatever, are flattening, without doubt. While the next regulatory change is already on the horizon, how those rules will impact the series is quickly becoming a significant discussion topic, especially given the scope of those changes, which span numerous domains, something Newey cannot recall ever experiencing. With regard to the 26 regulations, we don't have them yet. It's the first time I can remember where both the chassis regulations and the power unit regulations are changed at the same time. It's a massive change. Despite reports of concerns surrounding the new active aero approach, it is the other half of the rules revamp that has caught Newey's eye, adding, "The problem at the moment is trying to get the chassis regulations to work well with, let's say, a rather unusual power unit regulation." It will be interesting to see if Red Bull, under the guidance of Adrian Newey and Pierre Wache, will be able to create aerodynamic rocket ship. But this time they'll also have to put their faith into their newly set up engine factory, which will see Red Bull creating its first own F1 engine in cooperation with Ford. We can expect Red Bull to properly switch their focus to 2026 when the rules are published around June this year. So, does this also mean that it gives Ferrari and the other teams the change to bring back the battle at the front? After all, Newey confessed that the RB20 is probably the upper cap of the current regulations. What do you think? Will Red Bull still find gains this and next season? Or will they see out their current advantage and switch to the new regulations as fast as they can to recreate the same lead during the start of the new regulation era in 2026? If they do, could it come back to hurt them in the second part of this season or in 2025? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.